All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are very excited about this one tonight. We are going to be joined by Dr. Jill Stein. She is an American physician, activist, and political candidate. She was the Green Rainbow Party's candidate for governor of Massachusetts in 2002 and 2010, and was the Green Party's nominee for president in 2012 and 2016. Of course, she is also the Green Party's candidate for president now here in 2024, and we are so honored to have her join us tonight. So, Dr. Stein, thank you so much for coming on to the 24th hour.
It's really great to be with you. Thank you.
So, during the 2016 presidential election, many articles came out about how you called for a new 9/11 investigation. And I would imagine that most of the people in our audience tonight stood up and applauded when you did that. It's so refreshing to hear people who are at such a high level of political activity, being the Green Party candidate for president, to come out and to say what a lot of people on the internet have been saying for years. Can you explain your own personal reasons for why you think 9/11 deserves a second look by our government?
Well, at the time, I have to say it was really straightforward, mainly in that as the 9/11 Commission closed out, you had the chair of the commission, Bob Grahams, the senator, saying that there were lots of unanswered questions and there needed to be a new commission. So it wasn't rocket science to say that, he probably had some sense of what he was talking about, but then all of the issues that kind of converged around 9/11, which is, issues of imperialism, of terrorism, of our civil liberties, our freedom from, unwarranted searches and spying, and, our rights of free speech. There was so much that was happening around 9/11, and the whole discussion was so suppressed and kind of manipulated that it seemed like a no-brainer that there needed to be more discussion. Simple questions like, why did we attack Afghanistan when all of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia? And why were the many people from Saudi Arabia, why were they suddenly ushered out of the country secretly as the 9/11 news broke? It just felt like there were all kinds of questions that were being raised about what were the drivers and where were we going with this. And then I would add, in retrospect, we had these two major wars that were ginned up that both turned out to be completely false and bogus and extremely destructive. So you had really what was essentially a terrorist event that was then generating major wars and an assault on our civil liberties. And this is not anything new. This is kind of a recurring theme throughout U.S. history. And anyone who thinks that, that everything is fine in Kansas, needs to think again. So, those were just some of the things going on in my mind that said we need to understand this at a much deeper level than we did.
There was a lot of criticism from 9/11 family members during the 9/11 Commission hearings, and then, of course, afterwards, hence why our movement exists. It was actually started by a group of widows from New Jersey who did not feel that their questions were answered about why their husbands died on that day, and then carried on by several people. The opinion of so many out there is that this was not even a real investigation, that we did not even, that it was more of a pageant, something to, put out before the American public to say that, okay, we investigated it. This is where our conclusions. What is and then when we talk about this in the 9/11 truth movement, we get this attitude from the mainstream media that we should just let this go because it's been over 20 years since it happened. In your view, why is it important to keep on revisiting 9/11 and addressing any new anomalies that may come up, even though it happened so long ago?
You know, to me, this is basically about the mystery of U.S. foreign policy and all the intrigue that surrounds it. And this is not, the story on this is not simple. The story is not over. The story is just full of deception. The American public is told to believe that, we are a force for good, that we are an exemplary, model of democracy and all that, and yet the truth is we have committed regime change operations some 70 or 80 times since the Second World War, that we have sent our troops into other countries 250 times, according to the Congressional Research Service, just in like the last 30 years. So, that the war in Iraq took place because there were weapons of mass destruction that we needed to, find and to neutralize. Our foreign policy is not to be taken at face value by any means. And, I'm running for president. If I were president, on day one, we would begin congressional hearings on basically U.S. foreign policy and the role of the CIA and other, undercover agencies and forces in determining our foreign policy. There's a lot that needs daylight shined on it so that we can fix it. And we are, as we speak, we are experiencing right now, incredible blowback from the genocide that we are funding in, Israel's genocide of Gaza. And that too is something we're not supposed to discuss. In fact, if you do, you may get your head bashed in, or you may be criminalized, or you will lose your job, or you'll spend some time in jail. You'll be blacklisted. You'll be doxxed. If you're a student, you'll be expelled. Our conversations around foreign policy and, also kind of this concept of what is terrorism and who is the terrorist. It's not to be taken at face value. And, in my view, we have a terrorist state, the state of Israel, that is committing genocide right now. And, at this particular moment, it's very unclear whether we are about to head into World War III, as the U.S. insists on continuing to fund this, this absolute war crime, human rights abuse. And you have the president wringing his hands to say, oh, that bad Israel, they don't listen to me. When in fact, this president could just say, your weapons are over. You don't get any more weapons. You don't get any more money. The U.S. is in complete control here, but pretending we're not, and we're seeing battleships steaming and naval ships that are going full speed ahead right now into what could be, a third world war leading to a nuclear conflagration. So we have every reason, to really go back to the drawing boards on our foreign policies. And, I would say also on our civil liberties, because they both go down together. And we saw this happen around 9/11, and we're seeing this happen right now. So it's not over. We need a whole lot of daylight here, and we need a whole new kind of operating system when it comes to how we conduct foreign policy, how we talk about foreign policy, and how we determine foreign policy. Because right now it's basically, it's cooked up in the back rooms based on who's throwing the most money at our political, misleaders who are really war criminals now. You had an ovation a minute, when Bibi Netanyahu was invited into Congress. So I say what's going on right now is not different from the crisis around 9/11. And it's every bit as difficult to have a rational discussion about it and to bring it into some kind of service of democracy and the public interest. Because right now it's kind of putting us all in the target hairs of Armageddon. So, 9/11 is part of this discussion. Absolutely.
I love the fact that you bring up the lack of accountability from the president in terms of, well, we can't do anything about what's going on in the Middle East. This claim, when we all know that we could cut off the money to Israel if we don't like what they are doing. But then they put up this these claims that they have no control over it. Just getting back to 9/11 for a moment, because you also said you are running for president. I want to punctuate that point. So theoretically, you could be our next president. During the 9/11 Commission, when that was going on, George Bush would not testify openly to the commission. In fact, he only reluctantly did so in private with Vice President Cheney in the room. As somebody seeking that office, what is your commentary on that situation that the president could not talk openly with this commission looking into the biggest mass murder in our history that happened under his watch?
I think that is a 4-alarm fire right there. If the president cannot talk in confidence to the commission investigating the issue, what is he hiding? What is he covering up? I mean, it's almost like an admission that there's something rotten in Denmark here that badly needs daylight shined on it.
Right. And just to clarify, he talked, but it was in private. They couldn't write down any notes, only with Dick Cheney in the room. I know I have no political aspirations whatsoever, but if I was president of the United States, the buck stops there, as Harry Truman said. I'd be embarrassed if I needed a chaperone to speak about what happened under my administration. And I'm predicting that if a situation like that would happen, you would talk more openly in front of the world about what's going on and talk to the investigators. Getting back to accountability, AE 9/11 Truth has been investigating the destruction of the 3 towers in New York for many years. We found many errors and omissions of our own and the NIST reports, National Institute of Standards and Technology, on World Trade Center 7. We submitted a request for correction, which is the procedure. They didn't really address our points. They just said we stand by our reports, so we took them to court. In this process, court basically ruled that as long as federal agencies meet statutory requirements, they are actually not obligated to be scientifically accurate when issuing these scientific-based reports. Now, this does not only affect our issue, this affects anything in which science sits at the center, including environmental issues. I know the Green Party is very interested in, and as part of their platform. We tried to take this to the Supreme Court. They refused to hear it. So now we're moving forward with our own legislation called the Scientific Integrity Act. And this would require federal agencies to be scientifically accurate when issuing reports. It would also give citizens the standing to challenge those reports, because that's been an issue we ran into too, is that we have no standing to challenge a report even when it's inaccurate. In your view, should there be a requirement that scientific reports issued by the federal agencies be as accurate as possible? And what's the implications for our country if a standard of this kind of standard of unaccountability is allowed to continue?
Well, it's kind of scary, if reports about airplanes, for example, don't need to be accurate, how can you have confidence in airplanes, and that such standards are in practice may have a lot to do with the fact that we have a lot of trouble with airplanes these days, and the kinds of crazy accidents that are happening. What about public health? What about the origins of COVID, for example? Do we not need a reliable scientific report about that? If we want to prevent the emergence of another very dangerous virus, don't we need to know where this one came from? I mean, and that too is, a glaring, crisis in the making, that we just had this epidemic that wiped out well over 1 million people in this country and many millions around the world. And we cannot even look at the data available in this country to better understand, did this emerge from a laboratory where certain kinds of investigations were being done in China because they couldn't be done here because they violate safety standards? doesn't that need to be scientifically accurate? I mean, it seems to me we're really playing with fire here by pretending to be, a scientific society guided by, actual science, but not uphold those standards in our actual, written reports. So that just sounds crazy.
Well, what I've encountered from so many years of activism for our cause, and I'm seeing it grow now in recent years with the case I just cited to you, is this attitude of unaccountability to the people, where NIST does not bother to even defend itself. They just argue that we don't have the legal right to challenge them, and they hide behind this, and they hide behind this ruling that says that they don't even have to be accurate. That is where we are, but this applies in so many other issues here. And this lack of accountability is something that feeling, and they feel like they don't have any say in their own government, that we're told in civics when we're growing up that it is accountable to the people. So I'd like to know, what would a Stein administration and a Green Party presence in Congress do to combat this growing attitude of unaccountability that we're feeling from our government?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if we don't have accountability, why should we ever believe the agencies or the officials that have authority, that are making rules? Why should we ever believe them? And in fact, confidence in our government institutions, in our courts, in legislature, in the White House, you name it, across the board, confidence is really not there anymore. It's like we're a society that has lost its glue. We have to have confidence in who we are and in our institutions, that they are telling the truth and that they're accountable to us, and they need to be transparent as well. All those things are knit together. You can't have one without the other. And, absolutely, we have to restore that, or we're not going to get the glue back. How do we do that? So part of our platform is, number one, we need transparency. We need, in my home state, for example, the open meeting law doesn't apply. The open meeting laws, we have them for a reason, because the business of government is the people's business. So it needs to be transparent. It needs to be recorded. There needs to be a public record. And there are many states around the country that actually don't have an open process. But beyond that, we need to kind of put people back into this process. Right now, it's run by money. And elected officials and their appointees, our regulatory commissions, are very much, determined by who's got the big bucks. And we no longer have like town hall meetings. There used to be a tradition where elected officials had to answer to their constituents, and they regularly held town hall meetings. Now they're too busy talking to their donors, because we have a system that has been totally sold out to big money. That's who drives our legislation. That's who drives our regulatory agenda, and that's who's being protected, across the board. The EPA recently, has basically been caught red-handed protecting the railroads that spilled the very toxic stuff in East Palestine that, has really created a health disaster and an environmental disaster. Well, they helped cover all that up for quite some time, and have a lot of rules that prevent the people in that town from even knowing what got spilled, how much are they exposed to. They can't get repeat testing, what's going on with the water, because it's been found, downstream, miles and miles away. This is just how our agencies work right now. They protect powerful interests. Boeing, basically calls the shots in the FAA. You had the Sackler family writing the permissions for opioids and for fentanyl. So you have major institutions that are basically, it's the case of the foxes guarding the chicken coop. You had Monsanto executives that were at high levels of the FDA at the time that GMOs were approved as so-called, food substances, while you had a Monsanto official kind of presiding over this process. It's like, what's with that? It's like, is anybody surprised that people are so cynical about government right now and about society? And we need very much to get the big money out, get the people back in. So we will pass public financing, and we will push to get public financing of our elections, and also to push for an amendment which would repeal Citizens United. These two kind of go hand in hand, opening the floodgates to huge amounts of money to buy our elections. Right now, a single donor can write a check for $1 million. And that's routine in the Democratic and Republican and now Libertarian parties and RFK. They all practice what are called victory funds. They all have, their special expensive lawyers, and they set up these special loopholes that allow huge amounts of money to be dumped in by donors who then, it's like Donald Trump was totally, out front about this. He said to a gathering of fossil fuel executives, raise me $1 billion and then let's talk about what you need. And the Democrats have their gigantic donors as well. So this is what runs the show, and it's been shown, definitively that the agenda in the halls of power is really determined by who the big money and the lobbyists are. It's AIPAC, it's the war contractors. That's who's basically calling the shots here, and people are locked out. That's why we need to get the big money out. It'll take a while to pass a constitutional amendment, but we can pass public financing, and then it doesn't forbid big money from coming in, but it provides an alternate, clean source of campaign money, and the public then has the capacity to, express their approval for candidates who are not corrupted and who are not running on a corrupt system of big money. So it's not rocket science how to fix this. That's one thing to do. Another is, the town hall meetings, so that we are holding elected officials accountable. And if we're in the White House, we will be using the bully pulpit of the White House to shame elected officials into meeting with their constituents and naming names and calling people out who are too busy meeting with their donors to actually meet with their constituents. We will be supporting recall elections to help people understand the mechanism for recalling politicians who are not serving their base. And we will also bring back congressional hearings so that we have meaningful hearings to inform the public and to inform the press. And we will also take corporate consolidated media to court with antitrust lawsuits to break up the big corporate conglomerate media operations. Because when you only have 5 or 6 different choices of media, they're not going to cover things. They're just competing for access, and you have lapdog journalism instead of watchdog journalism. We need to bring back the watchdog journalism, because there's only a handful of journalists who are doing that. But without that, that's what the First Amendment is about. The First Amendment is first, because without it, we do not have a democracy. We need to have a free press, which is, free from government censorship and oppression, and free from corporate control as well. We need that. We also, we need the right to protest and freedom of speech and all that, which is being shut down right now. But in terms of what we can do about holding elected officials accountable, it's not rocket science how to do this. It's just about breaking through this wall of silence. And let me make a quick comment about that, if I could, because we are the only anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker, climate emergency campaign with a pathway to the White House. We're already on the ballot for well over a majority of voters, and we're on our way to being on the ballot for most voters across the country. So we are the only such campaign that will actually call out the genocide and the endless war machine. But this is where most American people are. And so that majority point of view is being conveniently kept out of the discussion and off the airwaves. So I just really want to encourage people, to to make this happen, to own this election. There are going to be 3 pro-genocide, pro-war candidates on the ballot. 3 of them. They could all be splitting the pro-war vote, and we could be unifying the anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker, climate emergency vote. In a 4-way race, it can be won with as little as 26% of the vote. It depends how the votes sort out, but that is a possibility. So I just want to encourage people. The propaganda is that we are powerless and you should be hopeless and you should give up and walk away. And it's really important to fight back against that, to hold power accountable, and to demand that we actually have a future we can survive in, because the one that we're making a beeline for right now is not survivable on many, many counts. So just reject that propaganda of powerlessness.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the examples that you cited regarding the corporate power within our government. I've used the example before when talking about the Scientific Integrity Act. Let's say you have a company putting out chemicals and there's kids getting cancer in an area, but the president of the company happens to be the president of the United States' friend. Government can get away with putting out a false report. So much relies on scientific reports by government, hence, and I say this to our audience, why they need to get behind the Scientific Integrity Act. Dr. Stein, in our last few minutes here, I just want to have you address one other thing, because just from being out in the streets and talking to people, every time a presidential election comes up, everyone I know says, I don't like either of them, because they're only thinking about the 2. Yes. I don't like either of them. I'm not voting. I don't vote. It doesn't do anything. Well, you could vote a third party. They're not going to win. I'm throwing my vote away. What do you have to say to those people? Why do they need to start looking towards third parties and trying to make a third party basically take the presidency in this election or in future ones?
If you're ever going to get, to your destination, you have to start walking. You have to start where you are and you have to build on that. When you hear nonsense like that, like, oh, why bother? To me, it's like hearing somebody in an abusive relationship making excuses for their abuser and why they stay with them. It's fundamentally a disease. It's a political disease. It's a disease of presuming that you are powerless, that you don't deserve a future that works for you. It's just nonsense. And when people can break up with their abuser, they feel really good and they discover a whole world of possibility. And that's one important thing to point out to people. Sometimes that helps. The other thing, though, well, let me just make a couple other quick points here. This is propaganda. It's intended to disempower you. It's intended to make you feel hopeless. If you look at where the whole argument of, they're spoilers and they don't deserve your vote. It's important to check that, because we're told that the Democrats own our votes, or maybe it's the Republicans. We're told that the establishment owns our votes. They don't own our votes. They have to earn our votes. That's what democracy is about. Politicians have to earn your vote. You have a choice. Your vote is your power. If you let them basically demand your vote, you entirely lost your power in a democracy, and it's not a democracy. You're just following marching orders from the political elites. So look where it's gotten us. We're in really desperate straits right now. Among architects and engineers, maybe people aren't struggling to keep a roof over their heads, but you're the exception. Most Americans, it's like 50% of Americans actually are spending between 30 and 50% of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. Over 60% are living paycheck to paycheck. Like 100 million are struggling with either medical debt or student debt. Some 8 million people were driven into poverty last year by our healthcare outrageous costs. Yet we are squandering half of our congressional budget on the endless war machine, which doesn't make us safer. It endangers us at the same time that it impoverishes us, and it creates failed states and mass refugee migrations and continuing terrorist threats. It's like our world is on fire, whether you are looking at the meltdown of the climate, imminent nuclear war and endless war, whether you're looking at crushing inequality in the economy or rising fascism. We don't have to wait for Donald Trump for fascism. We have cop cities being built all over the country, cop cities where the IDF, the Israeli occupation forces, basically are training our police in how to bash in heads, how to silence our freedom of speech, how to basically, severely abuse people who dare to get out and stand up for our right to protest. So we're in a bad way. We're in a very bad way right now. We could see war. We could see World War III breaking out this week, and we have very little to say about it. The American public, like 68%, wants an immediate end to the genocide and a diplomatic solution. But we have, Congress is in lockstep, all supporting it and throwing money after it, giving a standing ovation every minute when that war criminal was invited to speak to Congress. So I just want to point out, it's broken. It's really about as broken as it can get. It's really important for us to demand that politicians earn our vote, to vote on behalf of what we want, not what they're telling us. If you bury your agenda and your needs beneath some lesser evil, you have disappeared yourself. You have disappeared your agenda. It doesn't exist. There's no record of it. If you want it, you've got to fight for it and reject the nonsense about spoilers, because that just, it's not true. The most spoiled election ever for Democrats was 2010, when they lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures, 64 seats in Congress, 14 in the Senate, as many governorships. And they lost it because they abandoned their base, not because of third parties. They have abandoned their base. That's why so many working people now vote Republican, not because they like what the Republicans do, but the Republicans express their anger, and they're really angry at the Democrats for making promises that they have broken over and over again by bailing out Wall Street when, while they were throwing out Main Street and depriving some 7 or 8 million homeowners of their homes. That's why the Democrats lost the 2010 election. That's why they continue to lose, but they want to blame it on third parties. That's nonsense. Third parties give people a reason to come out and vote who otherwise won't be voting. And in the last election, in 2020, it was 1 out of every 3 eligible voters who saw no reason to come out and vote. So, this is why they keep us silent and they disappear us. They've actually hired an army of lawyers to throw us off the ballot, and we're fighting that. They advertise for infiltrators and spies to mess up our ballot drives and our organizations. They pay people for this. The Democratic National Committee had the gall to actually advertise publicly for managers of infiltrators and spies. And now they're holding on to our matching funds. $300,000 that we were going to spend on our ballot drives, they have conveniently hijacked and won't give us until the ballot drives are over. So, empire is unraveling, and it is quaking in its boots because its days are numbered. People have had it. People are standing up and fighting back, and we should have all the courage of our convictions, because when we stand up, when we stand together, we're absolutely unstoppable. So I say, keep up your fight. It's a great fight, for scientific integrity, for daylight to be shined on our foreign policy, and to know the history of it, as well as to know the future of it. This shouldn't be decided in back rooms by the war contractors and AIPAC. No, this is our future, which is going up in smoke right now. And we have the numbers, we have the values. We can do this if we stand up to decide to make it so. So don't listen to those who tell you it's hopeless and you're powerless. They want you to be that. That's their wish list. So, reject what they're telling you to do and stand up and demand a future that's going to work for all of us. That is within our reach if we demand it.
That's right. And I saw a meme the other day that says, don't ever listen to the criticism of people who you would never go to for advice. And I certainly wouldn't be going to any of these people in Congress right now for any advice on anything. Dr. Stein, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and good luck in November.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.